Hey everybody, welcome to episode 75 of the Is That Normal podcast. And today we want to learn you real good on how to teach your kids.
And so for those of you who don't speak fluent hillbilly Southwest Missouri language, let me translate that for you. We here at Is That Normal podcast really want to help educate you with biblical content and relational principles to help you raise your children to follow Jesus and to be just generally good humans. And so that's
you have your language, I have mine.
That's right.
But today we're going to talk particularly about education itself.
That is right. And for many students in our area, when this podcast airs, it is going to be the day that they go back to school. And so we thought this was just a great time to talk a little bit about the importance of education, maybe how to approach that and how to help our kids with that. So, Randall, did you look more forward to the first day of school or the last day of school when you were in?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. That's a good answer.
So I was always excited when start of school came around. I really did enjoy school, but by the time it was starting to get warm weather, and by about February, March, I was ready for summer.
Out the door.
Yeah. So, yeah. But I really did enjoy school.
So what kind of things did you enjoy about school?
I was one of those weird kids. I love reading, history, anything in that realm. I was a big fan of lunch.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
did you bring your lunch or did you have school lunch?
I had school lunch.
Oh, yeah.
I was school lunch all the way. Square pizza.
Yeah.
Best thing ever.
Yeah.
But yeah, I really enjoyed anything kind of in history and English were kind of my two things. And so I was, especially as I got older, I was heavily involved in yearbook and newspaper staff. And actually I went to junior high in Lebanon, and our teacher there was a MU journalism graduate who had done a lot of different things, and so she was very interested in and really heavy on teaching how to write and do journalism. And so she took us to all these competitions and at MU and different places, and so it was a neat experience. That's I really loved that part of it.
Yeah, that's very good. So how would you describe yourself as far as a student when you were in school?
I would say I was a good student. I always got good grades, and my problem was really more at times test taking was always something that just I was pretty good at. Where I struggled was sometimes homework and things like that, because I knew I could do fine on the test, and so putting in the work
to get there.
In between to get there sometimes was probably my biggest struggle.
Yeah. And I have similar story to that. And was able to get by just on ability to think quickly and remember things well, but I wanted to succeed as well. I wanted to do well, and so it did have to put some effort in here and there. And but what's interesting is even knowing that I was a pretty good student, at least from outward appearances at that point. I think now about this a lot. If only I could go back, the things that I would do differently as a student. So how about you? What kind of student do you think you would be now if you went back to school?
Wow. I would definitely be probably a little more disciplined, and some of the things that I didn't think were as important then as I later found out, and maybe even vice versa. There's some things I probably put a lot of time and focus into that in the long run weren't as important. Just thinking specifically for me, the one thing I know in high school that hurt me a lot was when I got to my junior year, I took my ACT. Math was always the thing that I just did not like. I could do it, but I had to put more effort into it. And so when I got to the end of my junior year, I had enough math credits, so I did not take calculus and did not take a math class at all my senior year, and that really hurt my ACT score when I took it my senior year versus it actually went down for my junior year. Everything else went up, but the math went down so much because and so some things like that I would look back on and probably do differently.
Right. Yeah, I know for me, looking back, I think I would have taken more time to actually learn things rather than just try to do the test necessary to get the grade. And that's a big difference in how I view things. And a lot of that is because I think we both know, just because of the way life is, because of, I believe, what God's called us to be, and numerous other factors, we need to be lifelong learners. And a lot of that has little to do with checking off the right boxes to get a score, and a lot more on the skills to actually own and synthesize information. And so because of that, one of the things I've tried to do with my kids, one of the things we've tried to do with our youth group, and something we kind of want to talk about today is how do we help kids today gain the skills and the philosophy to become lifelong learners in the future.
Well, welcome back to the Is That Normal podcast, and we want to connect and hear your stories as well, and you can do that through several different channels. You can do that through Facebook, Instagram, you can email us, but today, we're talking about education. So my question is, are we going to give like the top 10 ways for your kids to have like genius level IQ, straight A's, and perfect ACT scores? Is that? Because if so,
I wish I
think
had
this
that.
podcast could go viral.
That's right. I wish I had that list, but no, definitely I've not got that mastered for myself or for any of my kids. That is for sure. But that's not exactly our goal. Some of those metrics you just talked about, those should be. Some of those are just factors of lots of things.
Sure.
But getting good grades and doing well in school should be a symptom of being a good learner. So that's really kind of the goal we want to talk about. I know for us. As we've raised our children, as I've tried to influence youth in our church, my goal is for them to own their education and their beliefs and their worldview, and to not just repeat what's being told them, but to have a deep intrinsic knowledge of that. And one of the things that for Shannon and I, that has been a big kind of guiding statement that we heard early on when we, were trying to figure out how to educate our children, is we don't really want to fill a bucket. A lot of what we've looked at, I think, as education is here's a pile of information, put that in your bucket, look at it, and then give it back to me. And so it's a repetition of information. And there's a point in education, we'll talk about this in a minute, there's a point in education where that's a part of the process to learn. But ultimately, the end goal is not just that you've made sure you put all the right things in your bucket, but that you have lit a fire under your children that has a passion for learning, and that's a completely different goal than having a certain score at the end of the day. And I think that lighting a fire is what's going to make us successful in our faith, in our life, in our relationships, in our work, whatever that is, as we head towards the future. So that's really what we've tried to do with our kids.
So that's geared more towards kind of the process rather than the destination.
Right, absolutely.
So what can help us light that fire that you're talking about?
Yeah, the interesting thing is as we, Shannon and I did a lot of research on this when our kids were little, the number one factor that is going to contribute to your children doing well in their education is parental involvement. We, in our path, we went through a long path of different things, and eventually we decided to homeschool our children. And one of the things that impacted that the most was we heard a speech from a professor from Ball State University. His name is Dr. Jay Weil, and Dr. Weil said that he noticed over a couple semesters that as he looked at the top 10% of his classes, that a majority of that top 10% were kids who'd been homeschooled. And he was like, well, that's weird. And so he went around, asked other people in other departments, and they all said, yeah, that's true. I have the same experience. And he was like, well, why? Like what are they doing? Like what's the magic pill there, right? And so he went on this crazy nationwide study and research. And what he did is he researched standardized tests. And what he found out is interesting is that for children who are homeschooled, their average score on standardized tests, when you think about the percentile ranking in the whole nation, was almost always 80% or above. Whereas the nationwide average on public school is 50%. Oh, wow. And but then he dug into that deeper, and he found out that even in the public school setting, if you add in the factor that they had involved parents, that the number went back up to that 80% or so of those kids did really well at their standardized tests. And so through all of that, he gleaned that the number one factor of kids doing well on those standardized tests was parental involvement. And for us, I mean, the the theory is that if you're homeschooling, you'll have 100% parental
True,
involvement.
yes.
But even in the public school setting, if you have parents who are engaged, spending time with their kids, invest in their education, you can see similar results. And but parental involvement is the number one factor of seeing your kids be successful.
So what does that look like? What kind of involvement are you talking about for parents?
Yeah, so that's several things. I think it starts off with just being open for conversation. Just making sure that you are creating that space where you're talking to your children about their education. You're asking them about their education. You're on top of what they're learning, and more than just like, did you get your homework done? Do you know your spelling words? Like that whole concept of like, well, what are you excited about, and what is it about what you're learning that fascinates you, and what do you wish you knew more about, and really going past the content into the heart of our kids. And as we do that, I think what we're going to do by asking questions, we're going to teach them to ask good questions.
Yeah.
And so we're going to reflect to them this idea that when I'm reading something, it's not just about memorizing this, it's about, what does this make me want to know more about? How does this connect to other parts of my life, and teaching them to think those critical type of thinking skills. For us, we've really ascribed to the classical education model, which that's a formal term in education, which classical education comes from Greek, the old Greek education philosophy, where you start a kid out with grammar and facts. It's kind of a rote memorization, and at early ages, that's what kids need. They're a sponge, and so you're teaching them words, and you're teaching them numbers, and you're teaching them arithmetic, and those are just things, man. You throw them at them, they absorb that, regurgitate it to you until they've got it down. Then we move kids, as they're kind of in that late elementary, middle school age, to what we call logic, which is where they start putting those pieces together. Well, this is how numbers and letters and history and all these things kind of correlate. So we start putting those pieces together. But what we need to get them to in that late middle school and the high school is what they call rhetoric, which is critical thinking skills. And I know for me, that's been one of the biggest challenges, particularly with teaching high school youth at our church, is that kids are not trained to have that critical thinking skill. And so when we're asking them deep questions about their relationship with God, we're asking them deep questions about, what their future is going to look like, with how they're going to handle their relationships, they want you to give them the answer so they can give it back to you. Yeah. And that's why we get those Sunday school answers, like, what's the answer? Jesus is the answer. But we've got to get them to where they have that critical thinking skill.
Yeah. And have you found, is there a difference? I mean, as long as you've been doing youth ministry for several years now, so do you see a difference now versus 15 years ago?
Honestly, I think kids are more open to questions now than they were 15 years ago. And I don't know all the factors in that. I ponder whether it's because kids are becoming more and more autonomous on the way they learn because of technology and media. Just that diversity and that ultimate optionality. Kids can be off studying like some really obscure corner of whatever they're interested in, and I think they've done that more, and so I think they've learned how to make those connections, and so at least upper level logic, I think, may be on the rise, because they've had to figure out how to navigate that and figure out what connects to each other, and so I think that's good. I think that's positive, but we as parents have got to monitor and guide that, because I know what tends to happen is they do that alone in a room, and next thing you know, they're off in the dark web, and you're like, what are they learning over there, right? So we've got to be there to kind of guide what they do with that skill. Because information, we've talked about this before, information is, there's so much more available at so much more accessible than it's ever been before. So really, like you said, you can pretty much find information, good, bad, right, or wrong. Exactly. Anywhere. Exactly. Yeah, and that's time. It too, is figuring out how to discern what is true, which that's probably a whole nother podcast. But how do you know that what you're consuming is accurate? That's a big piece of that. So
how do we accomplish some of those things that you're talking about?
So one thing we've tried to do that's been very successful in our own home, and with youth to some degree, is give them good, engaging materials and have them available. So for us, some of those things look like live books. That's a term we use at our house. So we tend to try not to read a lot of like compiled textbooks and reference books. we want to read books that are written by the people who experience those things.
Yeah.
One really like big example for me is All Quiet on the Western Front, which is in our kids' reading curriculum in their high school, and it is written by a German World War I veteran about their experience in the war and on the field. And it's just really, every one of my kids who've read that book go, that is one of the most like challenging and useful books I've ever read, because it's the other side's perspective of a story that we think we know everything about, and just so and you can't discredit it, 'cause it's an eyewitness account, and so that has been a good tool. So we read lots of books by old dead people to kind of help us give a variety of perspectives. We also try to just have, and we have those books out. Like if you go to my house, there's books out all the time.
Yeah.
And there's also paper. We go through reams of paper because my kids love to draw and write and cut them up and make paper monsters out of them. And so just give them tools to explore. Another tool that has just been one of the weirdest and coolest is we have a lot of like field guides around. And so one of the books that my kids have used the most is the North American Wildlife Guide.
Yeah.
And every one of my kids, my book is just all like mangled and the covers off, because you'll find my kids out in the yard or in my barn or whatever with that book, identifying plants and bugs and animals, and then they'll get paper out and they'll draw pictures of it, and they just love learning, and they have that tool to learn more about things that they're experiencing. And I think that's really a lot of what that is. We keep cookbooks around. One of the things we do is we like look for recipes from other cultures, and my kids will make the food, and and that's fun. We've used robot kits, and we've got stuff to do experiments with, and so just basically creating the tools out there for them to learn when they want to know something more. But the other part of that, I think that's just as important as having good resources, is having margin in their time and their mind in order to get bored enough and curious enough to go do those things. And so that part of that, that's what we as parents, we've got to provide those resources, and then we've got to give them a schedule that allows them both free time, but to pull back from some of the easy distractions so they get bored enough to go explore. So that's been a lot of what we've tried to do.
And that's interesting, because probably now more than ever, we talk about the advantages of technology. Sometimes that can be a little bit of a disadvantage, because there's always something to do and something to have to kind of disconnect with. But you're saying boredom is not necessarily a bad thing.
Boredom is necessary for curiosity, which is necessary for learning.
Yeah.
I mean, all the like people we think are the smartest people who wrote all these things and discovered, Newton and Leonardo da Vinci and all these people, it was because they didn't have a whole lot else to do, and they got around there sitting there staring at bugs and plants and trees, and they're like, I wonder what makes that work, and then they dug further, and that's how that process starts.
So I think that's an important point to take away is, not that means there's not a time for screen time and things like that, but building in some of that time of, sometimes your kids will complain about being bored, but they need that time to figure out something to do, and that's where that innovation and that creativity comes in.
Yeah, my kids will fight you to the death if you try to take away their, we've got a 3:00 hour where they get to do whatever within reason, whatever they want on their devices. They get screen time for an hour or so. That kind of fluctuates. But then we also have an hour where there's devices get turned in, and there's nothing really on your schedule. So go do something. Go ride a bike. Go jump off of something. Go climb something.
Jumping your bicycle off of something never would have happened if it weren't for boredom. So.
That's exactly right. Yeah, Supercross would have never happened. BMX wouldn't be a thing.
That's right.
Yeah.
So what are some of the next steps for parents who are maybe looking at how they can start doing some of these things?
Yeah, I think it starts with finding out what your kids are interested in. And again, that's creating space to sit down with them and talk to them about what's going on, both in their formal education and then just in their own interest. And just gleaning, well, what are you excited about? Like, what was the neatest thing that you've learned this week? Like what, if you had time and all the resources in the world, what would you learn more about this week? And then when they do that, engage them, whether it's providing for them a way to do that study or maybe learning it with them or doing it with them. I think that's really important. Again, creating that parental involvement, teaching them how to explore deeper. Then I think making good time to ask questions about their education. I think that needs to be on your schedule. And they need to know that, and you need to know that. At these times, we're going to sit down, and I want to hear about what's going on with your formal schooling.
Yeah.
And make sure that we do that.
And that takes a little bit of effort beyond how was your day when you pick your kid up for school or when they walk in the door.
It does. You have to have some pre-planning to do that. You have to think about what you're going to ask, what you need to know, what you expect from them. Yeah. So take some time.
I've met very few kids, especially teenagers, that when you say, how was your day, are going to expand beyond a one-word answer.
Absolutely.
So you got to ask the right questions.
And that's the thing, too. We've talked about this before, asking questions and building rapport. It may not go great the first time. They may either give you the one-word answer, and that's it, until they get irritated, until you buzz off. I mean, those things will happen, but don't give up.
Yeah.
You regroup, come up with a new plan, attack it again. I think we just have to be in there and doing that. And then lastly, find other voices that help you. I mean, again, that's one of the reasons we do this is, none of the things I'm sharing is my own ideas. It's stuff I've gleaned from other voices and lots of experience and lots of failed moments where I'm like, well, that didn't work. Let's try this. And so, so find voices. And one I just want to recommend to you, this has been one person that's been a voice for Shannon and I as we've thought through educating our kids, is Sally Clarkson, and she actually, some of her family are also involved in what she does, but she's an author. Her daughters are also authors. She has a podcast every week called At Home with Sally, which we'll put links to this in our notes to this episode. But this is a book of hers that I really recommend. It's a pretty quick, easy read. It's called Awakening Wonder. And she just talks a lot about what we're talking about today, about the philosophy of how we want to see our kids' education go. And again, that could be whatever your setting is. It doesn't have to be homeschooling. It doesn't have to be public schooling. It's just really us investing in our kids. And I just want to read a couple of things she said in there, because she says each child has individual fingerprints, unique DNA, and a distinct personality accompanied by particular references and drives. When a parent learns to look deeply into her child's makeup and sympathizes with his unique design, they can develop an ability to open the child's heart, which is, I think, really, that's our goal, isn't it? We want to get beyond surface. We want to get to the heart of our kids. And so she says this about her philosophy of that. She says, consequently, what we did would not work in exactly the same way for another family. Education is not about enacting a prescriptive, box sort of curriculum-based classroom, but instead is about passing on a legacy of a love for learning, an independent joy in discovery, a motivation to bring light, beauty, and goodness back into the world of our children. And I just don't think you could say it much better than that.
That's very good. Well, as we wrap up today, our two takeaways. The first is to maybe check out some of this content by Sally Clarkson, the podcast or the book that you mentioned. And I assume we'll put some links to that stuff on there. And the second is just learn something with your kids. Maybe that starts with just asking some of those deeper questions and figure out, what they are learning and so maybe just doing something with them.
Absolutely. Learning together. Yeah,
absolutely.
right.
All right.
Be abnormal.